Yeah, not a question, if I may. I just have a brief comment. I was privileged to be a speaker at one of the other panels. And as I said then, but I do want to expand, I think that the answer is pregnant. The question is pregnant with the answer. What I'm trying to say is the very question which you posed suggests, in my mind, the answer. I don't know, I'm not sufficiently qualified or knowledgeable, except in a generic way about the jurisdiction of the Civil Rights Commission. I'm generally knowledgeable about the enabling legislation, of course. But it seems to me that when you say a new era defining the civil rights in the 21st century, it seemed whoever came up with those words, whoever came up with that suggestion, that to me points the direction of where the commission should be going. And that part of that, I think, inevitably will include not only a consideration of a redefinition of civil rights, but inevitably it's also going to involve something called accountability of what has gone on before. And there's no more greater contribution that a commission could make to the American people than indeed to hold its own government accountable in terms of whether it has fulfilled what it has represented to the people it is doing. So therefore, defining civil rights in the 21st century is really where it's at as far as I'm concerned. And that I hope that whatever discussions have gone before about whether the commission should be abolished, its jurisdiction, which should or should not be changed. I'm not going to deal with structure. I'm only talking about substance. I think your mandate should be to define civil rights in the 21st century. And as I said in my remarks as on the panel, this conference and the chairman and the commissioners who convened this conference, in my judgment, whatever they didn't do in the past, okay? I'm not focusing on that. But what they did here today at this place, at this time, was, I think, a very significant step in the right direction. And so I want to go on record for commending the commissioners for doing that. Commendation doesn't mean that you're exempt from criticism, but I do want to commend you for doing that. And as I said, and I'll repeat it again, I can't think of any conference that's more important or a subject to consider than what you suggested we consider, with all due respects to the NAACP Convention and the National Urban League Convention and the Student and the Southern Christian Leadership Convention, all those conventions. And I have a little bit of knowledge and experience on that. You are focusing on what you should be focusing on for the 21st century.
Panelists, do you have any comments there?
Except to say that I agree completely.
Well, cool. Mr. Schmackel, I've never seen you without a tie on.
Thank you. My question is actually about resources, which is maybe an issue both sides of the aisle can agree a bit more on, at least some folks. The commission right now has under 50 employees, down from hundreds. It has, I don't know the exact count now for social scientists, but I think it's probably under 3 or less. The state advisory committees, which there were many members here before, don't have a chance to meet more than once, maybe twice a year, depending on their particular region and topic. There's so many things that the commission can do, you're saying should do. Putting aside questions about broadening the scope of the commission, the ability to actually do fact-finding now, to handle subpoenas, to be a clearinghouse for information, these are potentially massive projects which now a staff of under 50 and a shrinking or flatline budget has had to deal with. So the question is, what would be the minimum resources for the commission to actually fulfill its mission? And how does one go about attaining those resources, or working with other agencies, farming out some of its responsibilities, limiting its scope, as Commissioner Redenbaugh spoke. Maybe through limiting its scope, it can focus a little bit more on just doing investigations, or just being a clearinghouse for information, or just having public hearings. I know in the last, I think 6 years, there's been one commission meeting, to my knowledge, outside of Washington, D.C., which was in Nebraska, which there was a gentleman here earlier from Nebraska as well. These are tremendous capabilities in the legislation that the commission is enabled to do, but it hasn't been able to do them. Politics aside, it doesn't seem to have the resources. How do you get them? What are the minimum requirements? And how is that going to limit any future for the commission?
Panelists, who wants to field that?
Well, first, I thank you, Richard Schmeckel. I think that's a great question. Certainly, you need to figure out what it is the commission is focused on before you figure out how much it's going to cost. But at a bare minimum, the commission is focused on monitoring civil rights violations in the United States, evaluating civil rights enforcement, and providing some sort of clearinghouse on civil rights information. And in my view, to do that properly would require a multiple of its funding. Certainly, it can't be done for, and I don't know what the current funding is, but it was at $9 million for a while. That may sound like a lot to people who aren't connected with government, but in terms of the requirements of a government agency, it's tiny. And what I would say is that if we take seriously the need to provide information and data for the President, Congress, and executive agencies on discrimination and civil rights violations, it should be probably a multiple of its recent fundings, not just a little bit more, but a multiple. How you get that, I don't know.
Mindy knows how to get that, right?
Well, I'm not sure there's obviously different members and different senators who are there now and different staff, but it was a very, very, very hard argument for me to go to my boss to talk about funding for the agency when all that he knew the agency was doing was squabbling. And I think that that is the first step, that there has to be a commitment among the staff, the commission, the commissioners, and all of the stakeholders to turn a new leaf and to stop the squabbling and fight for the common good, and to be able to put together a proposal to take over to Congress and say, here's what we can do, here's what we think you want us to do, and here's how much it will cost.
Russell, do you have a comment on that one?
You get money the same way any group finds investors, and that's by building trust, having a shared vision or purpose, and producing reliable and good product. And then people invest behind that. We've proven that you can't, the commission has proven when I was there, you can't get more money by promising to be good in the future, even though you've been bad in the past.
Good point. Yes.
Hello, I'm Mary Ann Zara. I'm a reporter for Education Week newspaper. And on the website, the description of the commission said that one of its missions is to provide advice to the president. So I just wondered, has the commission provided any advice to the president that the president has received and acted on it, or has it provided any advice that it feels the president should have acted on? Or what's the relationship between the Obama administration and the commission? I've heard, there's so much talk now about civil rights and increase of enforcement of civil rights in the schools. How does the commission play into some of that?
I'm not sure we have the right panelists for this because they haven't been working with the commission in the last year or so. But panelists?
Or maybe you could answer it as a commissioner.
Oh, I was told to be a good moderator and not go into to things, but I'd be happy to talk to you after.
Well, let me try to at least get it started. The commission routinely provides advice to the president and Congress, but often takes the term president broadly to include the entire executive branch. So much of its advice deals with the way executive agencies should do their business. And I would say that it does this certainly annually in its enforcement report, but also in its briefing reports, which are typically, although not always, laden with recommendations for the way both the executive branch does its work and what Congress should do. And at least going back several years, I would say there's been a lot of advice coming from the commission. Most of it is not followed. Occasionally it is. And sometimes it's hard to know when the commission makes a recommendation and something is done afterwards, whether there's cause and effect or not. So for instance, just a few years ago, after a briefing on campus anti-Semitism, the commission recommended, among other things, that Congress improve its hate crime data gathering processes for higher education. And within 2 years or so after that, in fact, Congress did pass legislation that improved that very process. Now, there had been other groups pushing for this before the commission made its recommendation, and others who did it afterwards, but that's one example. Another example, going back a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, is when the commission recommended that Congress not pass a particular bill regarding Native Hawaiian sovereignty. The commission's recommendation was considered to be very influential in the decision of the last administration, the Bush administration, to urge Congress not to pass it. And Congress did not pass it at that time, and I understand still has not. So there have been a couple of examples where things have been done that the commission has recommended. There are lots of examples where things haven't been done. I know there have been recommendations to the executive and Congress over the last year. I'm not aware of any that have actually been followed yet. I could be corrected, but I think it's definitely worth having an agency that continues to put these recommendations forward.
Yes, we're getting to you before the end here.
That's